The late summer sun hung over Prince George's County like a watchful eye, warming the sidewalks and the rows of tidy houses lined with trimmed hedges and flags fluttering lazily from porches. In this neighborhood just outside Washington, D.C., mornings often carried a quiet buzz, the kind that came from early commuters heading toward the city, school buses groaning awake, and dogs barking at joggers passing by. It was a place where people carried stories bigger than they let on, and where children often knew more about the world than adults expected. 12-year-old Malik Johnson stepped out of his home and pulled the front door closed behind him, adjusting the straps of his backpack as his mom called through the screen, reminding him not to forget his lunch. He already knew it was tucked into the front pocket, but her reminders still came like clockwork. Malik peeked back at her through the mesh, seeing her smile soften before she waved him on. He walked down the steps with the deliberate ease of a kid used to moving between two different worlds, the warm, grounding comfort of home and the unpredictable terrain of middle school. He lived with his mom most of the time, though his dad visited often, more than his job probably allowed. That was what everyone said. Malik never questioned it, because his dad always seemed to show up at the right moments, arriving home in pressed shirts or crisp uniforms, carrying a calm that seemed to settle the air. People usually assumed things when they heard where his dad worked. Malik listened to those assumptions with a shrug, pretending he didn't care. Sometimes he really didn't. Other days, though, they stuck to him. This morning his mind wandered as he walked toward the bus stop at the corner, a place where the asphalt dipped and collected rainwater in shallow pools after storms. A few other kids were already there, scattered in their usual clusters. Some chatted, some scrolled on their phones. Some, like Malik, just stood quietly. He nodded at a friend, then took his usual spot near the lamppost. The bus pulled up with its brakes hissing, and Malik climbed in, finding his seat toward the back. As the bus rattled toward Lincoln Ridge Middle School, he stared out the window at the passing neighborhoods. He tried not to think too hard about the day ahead. That was his strategy most mornings, one period at a time. School wasn't awful, but there were days when it felt heavy. He did his best on assignments, stayed out of trouble, and kept to himself when teachers asked too many questions. He liked science, liked history, liked the way stories from the past felt like puzzle pieces scattered across a massive table, waiting to be connected. He liked imagining how people made the choices that shaped the world. But English class was another matter. His English teacher, Ms. Hall, had a reputation for being unpredictable. Some days she was full of energy, laughing and encouraging. Other days her patience thinned quickly, and her words landed with a sharpness that sent students shrinking into their seats. Malik tried not to stand out in her class, but sometimes he did without meaning to. A question answered too confidently. A comment she didn't like. A moment she felt challenged. He didn't have a problem with teachers usually. His mom taught at a local elementary school, and his dad always said educators should be treated with respect. But there were moments, small ones, quiet ones, when Malik felt something shift in the room, a subtle change in tone when Ms. Hall looked his way. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it. When the bus rolled into the school parking lot, Malik joined the flow of students heading inside. The hallways buzzed with chatter and lockers slamming shut. Posters covered the walls, announcing club meetings, sports tryouts, and community events. The smell of floor polish lingered faintly in the air. First period passed easily enough. So did second. It was during third period, right before lunch, that the tension usually began. English class. Malik slipped into his seat near the middle row, pulling a notebook from his backpack. Ms. Hall stood at the front, shuffling papers and clicking her pen in rapid, uneven bursts. She wore reading glasses today, their frames perched low on her nose. The classroom was arranged in neat rows, though the desks had their own history of scratches, doodles, and faint grooves left behind by bored students. As the rest of the class trickled in, she cleared her throat and announced that they'd be sharing their family background paragraphs aloud, an assignment given earlier that week. The project was simple: write about someone in your family and what they did for work. Malik had chosen his dad. He didn't go into detail, just wrote what he knew. He wondered if he should have picked his mom instead. Her job was easy to explain. His dad's was not. One by one, students began reading their pieces. Some stories made people laugh. Others earned polite nods. Malik listened, trying to stay calm as his turn approached. His moment came sooner than he expected. "Malik," Ms. Hall said, lifting her chin toward him. "You're next." He swallowed and stood, holding his paper with both hands. He read the words he had written in quiet, steady sentences. He kept his voice measured, avoiding any hint of pride or boldness that might draw unnecessary attention. When he finished, the classroom was quiet for a moment. Then someone whispered something from the back. A soft chuckle followed. Ms. Hall's expression shifted. "Your dad works where?" she asked, her voice carrying across the room. "The Pentagon," Malik answered softly. A few students exchanged looks. Ms. Hall raised an eyebrow and crossed her arms. "And what exactly does he do there?" "I don't really know everything," Malik said. "He works in security operations." It was the phrasing his dad used. It always sounded official, but not dramatic. Ms. Hall let out a slow exhale, the kind that hinted she was preparing to say something she shouldn't. Malik felt his stomach tighten. He took his seat, and the lesson continued, but the air felt different. Lunch came and went. The afternoon drifted by in a blur. After the final bell, Malik walked home, replaying the moment in his mind. He wondered why it bothered him so much. He wondered why it felt like the ground shifted beneath him. His dad was supposed to visit tonight. He had mentioned it earlier in the week, saying he wanted to check in on Malik's first month of school. He didn't always say when he was coming. Sometimes his schedule changed without warning, but he always showed up when he promised. Malik reached his house, walked inside, and placed his backpack beside the couch. His mom asked the usual questions: how school was, whether he had homework, whether he wanted a snack. He answered quietly, avoiding her gaze. She noticed. "Something happened today?" she asked gently. "A little," he said. "Not a big thing, though." But it felt bigger the more he thought about it. That evening, when his dad arrived, Malik felt that familiar ease settle in the air. His dad's presence always brought a sense of grounding, like the world slowed just enough for him to breathe. They talked about school, friends, and classes, but Malik hesitated when the subject of English class came up. His dad caught the pause. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," Malik said. "It's fine." It wasn't, but he didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to seem dramatic. Later that night, after his dad had gone, Malik sat on his bed thinking about the school day. He felt a quiet mix of worry and confusion settling in his chest. He kept thinking about the way Ms. Hall had looked at him, the question behind her eyes, the disbelief. But tomorrow was a new day. Maybe things would shift. Maybe she'd forget about it. When morning came, The sky was overcast. The air carried a hint of moisture, as though rain was somewhere nearby. Malik followed his usual routine, getting ready, grabbing breakfast, heading to the bus stop. On the bus, he stared out the window again, but this time he felt a tension settling in the back of his mind, like an early warning. School unfolded in familiar rhythms, lockers slamming, footsteps echoing, announcements crackling through speakers. Students moved in currents, and Malik drifted through them quietly. He tried not to think about English class. He tried not to think about what might happen. But beneath all that effort, a quiet worry took root. Ms. Hall would bring it up again. He knew she would, and he had no idea how much that moment would change everything that followed. When the bell rang for third period the next day, Malik walked into class with a quiet breath, preparing himself. Ms. Hall stood at the front again, her expression unreadable. She shuffled through some papers, lifted her head and scanned the room. Something in her gaze paused on him a moment longer than usual. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he felt the shift again. The air changed. The room felt smaller. The day was moving towards something, though he couldn't tell what. It was the beginning of a slow build toward a moment he didn't see coming, a moment that would test the people around him and reveal things hidden beneath the surface. He sat in his seat, waiting for the lesson to start, waiting for whatever would come next. He didn't know that the next few hours would bring him to a place where fear, shame, tenderness, protectiveness, justice, and ambition would collide in ways he wasn't prepared for. The story had only just begun its turn, the early tremors of conflict rumbling quietly beneath the ordinary surface of a school day. The next morning arrived with a heavy gray sky stretched over the school, the kind that seemed to press the air down just enough to make everything feel slower. Malik stepped off the bus with his backpack slung over one shoulder, wishing for a quiet day even though something told him it wouldn't be. He made his way toward the entrance with his eyes lowered, blending into the flow of students streaming through the double doors. He tried to convince himself that yesterday's tension would fade on its own. Teachers got annoyed sometimes. Students got curious. Maybe today would pass without anyone mentioning his dad or the assignment again. But there was a small pull in his chest, something he couldn't name, that reminded him not to expect too much ease. Inside, the hallways were alive with chatter. Lockers clanged open. Shoes squeaked on the polished floor. A group of 8th graders laughed loudly near the water fountain, and Malik slipped around them, heading toward his first class. He kept his stride steady, not wanting to look rushed or nervous, but his mind replayed the conversation from the previous day more than he cared to admit. He couldn't shake the way Ms. Hall had reacted, the long pause, the tone behind the question, the way she seemed to search his face, as if trying to decipher something she didn't believe. His dad had told him plenty of times that some people would doubt him for reasons he couldn't control, but that didn't make it any easier to face. By the time third period approached, his thoughts moved in tight circles. He wished he could skip the class, at least for a day. But he knew his parents wouldn't approve. They always pushed him to meet things head-on, even when part of him wanted to drift quietly away. As the bell rang, Malik walked into English class and took his seat. The room hummed with ordinary sounds, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, pages rustling, pens tapping. Ms. Hall stood near the whiteboard, erasing yesterday's lesson notes with long, quick strokes. Her posture was stiff, her shoulders raised slightly higher than usual. Something about the room felt off. When she turned to face the class, her expression held a tightness around the eyes. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the room, and cleared her throat. Before we begin today's lesson, she said, her voice calm but carrying a subtle edge, I want to address yesterday's assignment. Malik felt his pulse quicken. A few students shifted in their seats, sensing the shift too. I noticed that some responses may not have been entirely realistic, she continued. This project was meant to help you explore real careers, real family roles, and real-world responsibilities. Several heads turned, though no one said a word. She looked directly at Malik. And I think it's important, she said, for all of us to be truthful about what our family members actually do. The air tightened in Malik's chest. He felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room turning toward him, even though no one moved. The silence pressed in like a slow-moving tide. He swallowed hard. I was truthful, he said quietly. A few whispers rose near the back row. Ms. Hall clasped her hands in front of her. Malik, we need to avoid exaggerations. The Pentagon is not a place where just anyone can claim a family member works. It's a highly specialized facility with strict requirements. His cheeks warmed. His hands curled in his lap. I wasn't exaggerating, he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. My dad works there. Then perhaps, she replied, still standing tall, you misunderstood what he meant. Sometimes parents phrase things in ways that sound more exciting than they really are. For example, saying security operations when they actually mean something much more ordinary. The whispers grew. A sharp pang moved through Malik's chest. Not anger yet, but something deeper, something tangled with embarrassment and confusion. He lifted his gaze, meeting hers. My dad told me what he does. Ms. Hall sighed quietly, the sound barely audible but dripping with dismissal. Very well, she said, but for the sake of clarity and honesty, let's give everyone a chance to rethink their paragraphs before turning in the final version at the end of the week. A few students smirked. One boy in the back muttered something under his breath. Malik couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. He understood the tone. The lesson moved on, but the tension lingered around Malik like a cloud barely clinging to rain. He tried to focus on the worksheet in front of him, but his mind drifted. Words blurred. His pencil tapped lightly against the desk. He wondered why she doubted him so quickly, why it seemed easier for her to assume he was making it up than to believe him. Nothing about her reaction made sense. When the bell rang, he packed his things slowly, aware of glances from a few students as they filed out. He stayed behind a moment, waiting for the room to empty. He didn't want to accidentally cross paths with anyone who wanted to ask questions. But as he reached the door, Ms. Hall called his name. Malik, could you come here for a moment? His pulse jumped, but he turned back, walking toward her desk. She stood with a stack of papers in her hand, and for a moment he thought she might soften. Maybe explain. Maybe say she didn't mean to embarrass him. Instead, she spoke in the same cool tone. I want you to understand that honesty is important, she said, especially in academic work. It's easy for young people to misunderstand adult jobs. Your father may have told you something that sounded impressive, but it's possible you misunderstood the details. Her words sat in the air like stones. I didn't misunderstand, Malik muttered. Malik, she said, raising her voice slightly. There's no need to become defensive. I'm trying to help you avoid saying things that may not be accurate. His breath grew shallow. His palms grew warm. He looked at the floor, unable to think clearly. He wanted to speak up, but his voice felt stuck somewhere between his chest and throat. When he finally managed to speak, It came out small. "Why don't you believe me?" She hesitated. "I didn't say that," she replied. "I simply don't want you to set yourself up for embarrassment. I've seen students stretch the truth before. It never ends well." Malik nodded slightly, not trusting himself to speak again. "You can go to lunch now," she said. He walked out quietly, not bothering to look back. During lunch, he sat alone for part of the period, pushing food around his tray while his thoughts churned. His friends joined him eventually, asking if he was okay, but he kept the details vague. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't know how. The rest of the day passed in fragments. The tension left him distracted in every class. Once he got home, he placed his backpack near the door and walked straight to his room. His mom knocked a few minutes later. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." He didn't want to tell her what happened. Not yet. Part of him feared he'd sound childish. Another part worried she would call the school, making things worse. But when his dad arrived that evening, Malik felt something shift inside him. The moment he saw his dad step inside the house, tall, calm, sharp-eyed in a quiet way, he felt the tension inside him loosen. They sat in the living room. Malik's mom left them talking while she prepared dinner. "You got something on your mind," his dad said. Malik stared at the floor. Something happened in class. His dad listened intently as Malik recounted the moments from the last 2 days. The pauses, the doubt, the way Ms. Hall had singled him out. His dad didn't interrupt. His expression stayed steady, but Malik sensed a shift under the surface. When he finished, his dad leaned back slightly. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Malik nodded, but the reassurance didn't settle fully. His dad hesitated before asking, "Do you want me to come to the school with you tomorrow?" Malik's breath caught. Maybe. Maybe not. He didn't know. He didn't want to seem like he couldn't handle it on his own. But he also couldn't shake the memory of the look on Ms. Hall's face. The disbelief. "I don't know," Malik said. "I don't want it to get worse." His dad nodded slowly. "I understand. But you shouldn't be made to feel small for telling the truth. That's not something you have to handle alone." Malik looked at him, really looked at him. The same calm that steadied him as a child was still there. The same sense of safety. "I'll think about it," Malik whispered. That night he lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything again in his mind. He thought about the way the class had looked at him. The smirks, the whispers, the way Ms. Hall spoke to him with a tone that felt heavier than simple doubt. He wanted to believe it would just fade away, that tomorrow would bring something different. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. The next morning felt colder than the last, even though the weather hadn't changed much. The air carried the same moisture, the same hint of rain waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. At breakfast, his mom asked again if everything was all right. He nodded. She studied him, her eyes following the slightest changes in his expression. But she didn't push. His dad stood near the window, finishing a cup of coffee before heading out. He was dressed in dark slacks and a well-fitted shirt, more formal than usual. "You sure you don't want me to come in with you?" he asked gently. Malik hesitated. A part of him whispered yes. Another whispered no. "I think maybe after school," Malik said. "If something else happens." His dad nodded. All right. You let me know. Malik grabbed his backpack and headed out the door, trying to steady his breathing. The bus ride felt longer today. Every bump in the road rattled something inside him. He watched. The morning unfolded in a blur of small noises and shifting hallway currents as Malik walked through the school doors again, shoulders tucked slightly forward beneath the steady weight and of everything that had been happening. He tried to keep his focus anchored to the ground, letting his steps guide him through familiar routes while his mind drifted in unsettled loops. Nothing had resolved itself. Nothing had eased. And the memory of Ms. Hall's tone, her disbelief, her careful dismissal, clung to him like something he could not shake free. He moved through first and second period without absorbing much of anything. His teachers spoke, students murmured, pages rustled, pencils scratched against paper, and yet all of it felt muted, like listening to sound through a wall. He only half registered the material in front of him. His thoughts kept circling back to English class and the tight knot sitting somewhere between his chest and stomach. As third period approached, he felt a pull of dread that made every step heavier. He walked slowly toward the classroom, wishing he could slip into a space where no one expected anything from him. No questions, no explanations, no disbelief. When he entered the room, it felt colder than usual. Students chatted in low tones, but their voices felt distant, like echoes bouncing in a half-empty space. Malik took his seat quietly and opened his notebook, though he wasn't sure why. He didn't think he would write much today. Ms. Hall stood near the window, adjusting the blinds for a moment before moving to her desk. She looked composed, hair pulled back neatly, glasses sitting low as she reviewed a stack of papers. Her face carried the same expression it always did when she felt in control. Chin slightly raised, lips pressed into a thin line. When the bell rang, she cleared her throat. Good morning, everyone. Today, we'll be discussing narrative structure and how writers decide which moments deserve focus. Students settled. Chairs scraped lightly. Malik's heartbeat quickened. She continued, walking toward the whiteboard with her marker. When writers exaggerate certain details or invent things that didn't happen, it can affect the integrity of the story. Readers can sense when something feels off. Authenticity matters. The words felt pointed, even though she did not look at him. Malik lowered his gaze, staring at the faint smudge on his desk. She wrote the words, authentic details, on the board. Then she paused. Yesterday's assignment reminded me of this, she said. It's important for us to stay grounded in reality, even when describing people we admire. We shouldn't assume that something is true simply because we want it to be. She finally glanced toward him. A few students shifted in their seats. Malik felt his throat tighten. He tried to look forward, but his chest felt warm with a mix of shame, frustration, and something else he couldn't quite name. She continued the lesson, but every example she gave felt like another tap on the wound she had already opened. The class moved through pages of their textbooks, highlighting sections, answering questions, but the air stayed heavy. Malik barely wrote anything. When the bell released them, he gathered his things as quickly as possible. He slipped out of the room before anyone could stop him, pushing through the stream of students in the hallway. He headed for lunch, though he had little appetite. As he walked toward his usual table, a boy from another class intercepted him. "So your dad works at the Pentagon?" he asked, smirking. Malik kept walking. "Sure he does," another student chimed in. They weren't loud. They weren't cruel, but their tone carried enough doubt to sting. He reached his table, sat down, and stared at his food without eating much. His friends tried to make conversation, but the words barely reached him. He could feel the tension rising inside him, slow but heavy, accumulating in ways he didn't know how to explain. When school ended that day, he walked home with his shoulders hunched and his steps dragging. His mind replayed the day again and again, each moment sharper than the last. His dad was waiting on the porch. The sight of him stopped Malik in his tracks. His dad straightened when he saw him, stepping down the porch steps. "How was today?" his dad asked. Malik exhaled, a shaky breath slipping out. "Not good." His dad nodded once quietly. "Come inside." They sat in the living room. Malik's mom was still at work, so the house was quiet. His dad listened as he explained everything that had happened. The comments, the tone, the feeling of being singled out. His dad leaned forward slightly as he listened, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. His face stayed calm, but his eyes held something new: focus, intention. "Malik," he said once the boy finished, "no one should speak to you like that. No one should treat you like you're lying before they even know the truth." Malik nodded, but he felt small, smaller than he had felt all day. "Tomorrow," his dad said, "I'm coming with you." Malik's breath caught. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt fear. "What if she gets mad?" Malik murmured. His dad placed a hand on his shoulder. "She doesn't get to be mad. You didn't do anything wrong." Malik nodded again, but the knot inside him remained. That night he slept lightly, waking several times. He thought about the classroom, about the eyes staring at him, about the whispers. He wondered if things would change once his dad came in. He wondered if things would get worse. The next morning was quiet. The sky was still gray, but the air felt different, charged almost, like the moments before a storm. Malik dressed slowly, feeling the weight of the day ahead pressing on his shoulders. When he walked into the kitchen, his dad was already there, dressed professionally. His shirt was pressed, his shoes polished. He carried the posture of someone who knew his presence meant something. "You ready?" his dad asked. Malik nodded. His mom looked between them, sensing something in the air, but she didn't push for details. She simply kissed Malik's forehead and told him to have a good day. His dad drove him to school, something he rarely did, since Malik usually rode the bus. As they approached the building, Malik felt a tight pull in his chest. When they reached the entrance, his dad placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm going to speak to the front office," he said. "You go to class like usual. I'll come find you when it's time." Malik nodded and walked inside, heart beating hard. He tried to move through the halls without drawing attention, though he felt like even the air around him knew something was different. First period passed. Second period passed. He tried to focus on the lessons, but his thoughts kept drifting to the office, to his dad, to everything that might unfold. Then third period arrived. He walked into English class, pulse quickening as he entered. Ms. Hall stood at her desk, shuffling papers. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. He took his seat. Students filtered in, the usual sounds filling the room. But Malik could feel the shift, quiet but present, like the moment before a curtain lifts. When the bell rang, Ms. Hall began speaking again about narratives, structure, honesty. Her tone flowed with confidence, but then she paused mid-sentence. There was a knock on the door. Every head turned. Ms. Hall frowned slightly and walked to open it. Malik's dad stood in the doorway. He filled the space without trying to. He didn't raise his voice or straighten his posture. He simply stood there. Miss Hall blinked. "Yes? Can I help you?" "I'm here for my son," he said calmly. "Malik Johnson." A ripple went through the room. Malik's chest tightened. His breath came shallow. Ms. Hall forced a smile. "Oh, of course. Is there something I can help you with?" "Yes," he replied. "I'd like to talk to you. Now." Her smile flickered for a moment. "Class, begin reading Chapter 7 quietly," she said, stepping into the hallway. The door closed. The class exploded into whispers. Malik stared at the page in front of him, though he saw nothing but shapes. His hands trembled slightly. He wished he could hear what they were saying in the hallway, but the murmurs were too faint. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. The whispers inside the classroom grew louder, weaving in and out of the silence. Some students cast glances at Malik, trying to gauge his reaction, but he kept his eyes fixed on the desk. Finally, the door opened again. Ms. Hall walked in, her face stiff, cheeks slightly flushed. Malik's dad followed. He stood near Malik's desk. "Malik," he said gently, "come with me." Malik stood slowly, unsure what waited for him in the hallway. As he followed his dad out, he felt dozens of eyes trailing him, some curious, some wide, some holding something else entirely. In the hallway, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. His dad crouched slightly so their eyes met. "You're doing okay," he said softly. "I just needed her to understand something." Malik swallowed. "What happened?" His dad exhaled. "She doubted you. She dismissed you. And she spoke about things she didn't understand. I told her that stops now." Malik's chest loosened. Not completely, but enough to draw a steadier breath. "I'm proud of you," his dad added. "You handled yourself better than most adults would." A small warmth flickered inside Malik's chest. "Let's step outside for a moment," his dad said. "I want you to take a breath." They walked toward the front entrance, where morning light filtered through the glass doors. Outside, the air felt crisp against Malik's skin. His dad stood beside him, giving him space. "You don't need to go back to class right now," he said. "We'll give it a minute." Malik nodded, watching a few cars pull into the parking lot. He still felt anxious, still felt the sting of everything, but something else began growing beneath it. Something steadier. After a few minutes, his dad looked down at him. "You ready to go back in?" Malik nodded slowly. When they re-entered the building, the hallways were empty. His dad escorted him back to class, but didn't step inside. He placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "Remember that." Malik nodded and stepped back into the room. Whispers died instantly. He took his seat without looking at anyone. Ms. Hall cleared her throat. "Class, let's continue." But the atmosphere had shifted. Some students, and the moment Malik returned to class that day, something invisible shifted around him, as if the air itself had become aware of its own weight. Students glanced up from their pages, eyes flicking between him and the door where his father had just stood moments earlier. Some expressions carried curiosity, others uncertainty, and a few looked as though they were trying to solve a puzzle they never expected to be handed. Malik walked straight to his desk, settling into his seat without meeting anyone's gaze, but his heart beat harder than he wanted it to. Ms. Hall resumed the lesson, though her voice held a thin layer of strain, almost like someone trying to speak through a tightening throat. Her eyes occasionally drifted toward Malik, quick, fleeting looks that suggested a conflict rising inside her. Whether it was embarrassment, resentment, or fear, Malik couldn't tell. The space between them was now crowded with everything unspoken. But this wasn't the moment everything would crack. Not yet. The stage was still shifting, still aligning its pieces. There was more building beneath the surface. When the bell finally rang, the room stirred with tension. Malik gathered his things quietly, keeping his shoulders angled inward to avoid drawing more attention than he already had. As he exited the class, he spotted a few students whispering near the door, their eyes wide, their voices lowered as if they were dissecting something too fragile to say aloud at full volume. He didn't linger. He walked straight to the hallway, letting the current of students sweep him toward the next period. The atmosphere throughout the day carried an underlying hum, whispers trailing behind him, sideways glances from kids he barely knew, and a growing sense that the story around him was evolving faster than he could grasp. That evening at home, his dad stayed longer than usual. He spoke with Malik and his mom about everything again, explaining what had been said, what he had addressed with the administration, and what they planned to do next. Malik listened, feeling a strange mix of safety and unease. Safe because his dad was there. Uneasy because the school felt like a place shifting its weight in unpredictable ways. His mom hugged him tighter that night. His dad rested a hand on his shoulder before leaving, telling him he had done nothing to be ashamed of. But shame has its own way of weaving into the spaces left unguarded. Malik felt it growing anyway. The next day began quietly, almost deceptively so, with a soft morning breeze sweeping through the neighborhood. Malik walked to the bus stop with a knot sitting low in his stomach, one that tightened each time he remembered the way the classroom had gone silent when his dad appeared. On the bus, he sat closer to the window than usual, turning his face slightly so others wouldn't see how tired he felt. Kids chatted around him, but he couldn't catch much. Everything came through like muffled sound behind fogged glass. At school, the hallways buzzed with the same nervous excitement of early adolescence. Gossip, jokes, rushed steps. But Malik moved through it like a stone in a river, letting the current wash around him. Every now and then he heard a word or two that made him pause. Pentagon. His dad. Teacher got checked. Did you see him? None of it was malicious, not exactly. But none of it felt comfortable either. Third period arrived like a weight dropped onto his chest. He stepped into English class with caution, half expecting a confrontation, half hoping for neutrality. Ms. Hall stood at the front with her back turned, writing on the whiteboard. Her handwriting looked slightly tighter than usual, the letters pressed closer together. When she turned, her expression was composed, but there was something in her posture that betrayed tension. Malik took his seat. A pair of students exchanged glances before turning forward. Good morning, Ms. Hall announced. Today we're continuing with narrative analysis. Please take out yesterday's worksheet. The class rustled with movement, but about 10 minutes into the lesson, the door opened. A staff member stepped inside. Ms. Hall, the principal needs to see you. She stiffened. The class looked between her and the doorway. She exhaled through her nose, nodded to the students, and stepped out. The door closed behind her. A few seconds passed, and then the whispering started. Is it because of yesterday? Did someone complain? Maybe she's in trouble. Malik sat still, staring at the worksheet, though the words swam on the page. He didn't want this. He didn't want the attention or the drama or the whispers that followed him like shadows. He only wanted to be believed. The class continued quietly under the supervision of the staff member who waited by the desk, distracted by his phone. Eventually, Ms. Hall returned, face flushed, jaw clenched. She thanked the staff member, who nodded and left. Her voice, when she resumed the lesson, was measured, too measured, as though she was forcing steadiness. When the bell rang, everyone hurried out. Malik stayed behind only long enough to gather his things, but before he could exit, Ms. Hall called his name. "Malik!" He stopped, turning slowly. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Her tone was controlled. "I spoke with the administration. They informed me that your father expressed concerns about how you were treated in class." Malik swallowed. "Yes." She paused again. "I want you to know that wasn't my intent." He didn't know what to say. The hallway noise seeped through the closed door, mixing with the quiet tension between them. "I expect honesty from my students," she said. "You understand that." "I was honest," Malik whispered. Her jaw tightened again. "We'll move forward," she said. "But I need you to be mindful of how you present information about your family." It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a statement meant to close the discussion. Malik nodded and left without another word. Over the next few days, the environment in the classroom changed in subtle, unsettling ways. Ms. Hall didn't call on Malik often anymore. When she walked past his desk, her comments were short, clipped, sometimes unnecessarily sharp. Students seemed to sense the tension and reacted accordingly, some avoiding him, others hovering with questions disguised as curiosity. And then came the moment when everything tipped into motion. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The sky outside glowed with warm tones as the sun began its slow descent. Malik sat in English class again, working quietly on an assignment analyzing a short passage. Ms. Hall walked between the rows, looking over shoulders. When she reached Malik, she paused. She read the first line of his response, then frowned. "This doesn't follow the instructions," she said. Malik blinked. "It does." "I answered the prompt." She shook her head. "No. You described the passage using assumptions that aren't supported by the text." "I wasn't assuming," he said. "The prompt asked—" "Don't interrupt," she cut in sharply. A few heads turned. Malik felt heat rise in his face. "I wasn't interrupting," he said softly. Ms. Hall drew in a breath through her nose. "Bring your paper up here." He hesitated, then rose from his seat and walked to the front of the room. She stood with her arms crossed, paper in hand. "This is what happens," she said, her voice low enough to sound controlled, but loud enough for nearby students to hear. "When students become so caught up in portraying themselves a certain way that they start bending instructions, you need to be careful not to exaggerate or fabricate." The words hit him hard. She wasn't talking about the assignment. She was talking about everything. A quiet stir moved through the room. Students pretended to work, but their attention was unmistakably focused on the unfolding tension. Malik stared at her, throat tight. He wanted to speak, wanted to defend himself, to correct her, to remind her again that he had never lied. But the words wouldn't form. He swallowed. "I didn't fabricate anything," she sighed. "Malik, you need to understand that honesty matters, especially for young people who are trying." The door opened. Everyone turned. The assistant principal stood in the doorway. "Ms. Hall, may I speak with Malik for a moment?" The room fell silent. Ms. Hall stiffened. "We're in the middle of something." "This won't take long," the assistant principal said. Malik looked between them, unsure what was happening. "Bring your things," the assistant principal added. His pulse quickened as he gathered his notebook and backpack. He walked toward the door, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following his every move. In the hallway, the assistant principal placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father is here." Malik's breath caught. "He asked to speak with both you and Ms. Hall," the assistant principal continued. Malik's heart pounded. Not again. Not like earlier. This felt different. The tension in the air had a sharper edge to it. As they walked down the hallway, students peeked from doorways, sensing something out of the ordinary unfolding. Malik tried to keep his breathing steady, but the pressure building inside him felt almost overwhelming. When they reached the office, his dad stood near the front desk, calm, composed, and dressed even more formally than before. The staff members nearby looked uneasy, shifting in their seats or stepping aside. His dad turned when he heard them approach. "Malik," he said softly. "You okay?" Malik nodded, though he wasn't sure if the motion felt true. Moments later, Ms. Hall arrived, guided by another staff member. She entered the office with stiff posture, her expression a mixture of confusion and discomfort. "Please," the assistant principal said, "let's step into the conference room." They all followed. The room was small, with a long table and several chairs. Malik sat beside his dad, hands resting in his lap. Ms. Hall sat across from them. The assistant principal remained standing near the door. For a moment, silence settled over the room like a dense fog. Then Malik's dad leaned forward slightly. "I came because something happened in class again," he said, his voice steady and controlled. "My son felt targeted. Again." Ms. Hall opened her mouth, but Malik's dad held up a hand. "Before you speak," he continued, "I'd like to understand what exactly is going on. Because from what my son described, this is no longer a misunderstanding. This is becoming a pattern." Ms. Hall bristled. "I treat all my students equally." His dad's expression didn't shift. "Then explain why my son keeps being singled out. Explain why he is repeatedly told he's exaggerating when he talks about his family. Explain why academic feedback is delivered to him in ways that would never be directed at others." Ms. Hall swallowed hard, her composure thinning at the edges. "That's not what happened," she insisted. "I simply expect honesty." "And you assume he lacks it," his dad said, "before you even listen to him." Her jaw tightened. "I've been teaching for many years. I can tell when students bend the truth." Malik felt something rise in his chest. Hurt, anger, confusion all tangled together. His dad leaned back slightly, his voice still steady but sharper now. "Do you know what I do for a living?" he asked. Silence. Ms. Hall didn't respond. "I work at the Pentagon," he said, "in real security operations. Not the simplified version I explain to the public. Not the watered-down description I give my son, so he doesn't have to carry the weight of classified details." Ms. Hall blinked, eyes widening just slightly. "And my son," he continued, "has never lied about it. Not once." Malik's stomach fluttered. A strange mix of pride and vulnerability surged through him. "This isn't about my title," his dad said. "It's about your assumptions. about how quickly you were willing to undermine his credibility, about how you kept doing it even after being corrected. Ms. Hall looked down at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, her voice was quieter, but still tense. "I didn't mean to make him feel." "But you did," his dad said. "And intention doesn't erase impact." The assistant principal shifted, stepping forward slightly. "Ms. Hall, this is a serious concern. We need to address it appropriately." The room felt tense, thick with the weight of what was being said. Malik sat silently, hands still in his lap, watching the adults navigate a conflict that had grown far beyond the original moment. His dad leaned in again, speaking with a lower tone. "My son deserves the same respect you give every other student," he said. "He deserves to feel safe. He deserves to be believed. And he deserves an education free from prejudice or assumptions." Ms. Hall's lips parted, but whatever she wanted to say faltered. The air between them was changing. Something long building had finally cracked. And yet this wasn't the climax. Not fully. The pressure was still rising. The fault lines had only just begun to widen. Something bigger was coming. Malik felt it. His dad felt it. Even Ms. Hall felt it. The moment teetered, not resolving, not collapsing, hovering on the edge of a truth that had yet to fully reveal itself. The story was still climbing toward its breaking point, carrying everyone with it. The air inside the conference room felt as though it were holding its breath. Even after everything that had already been said, the tension continued to thicken, as if the walls themselves understood that the moment had not yet reached its breaking point. Malik sat still beside his father, hands folded in his lap, the rhythmic thumping of his heartbeat filling the quiet spaces between voices. But the conversation wasn't finished. It wasn't even close. Because beneath the surface, beneath the concerns, the denials, the careful words, there was something deeper waiting to erupt. The assistant principal broke the silence first. "I want to ensure we're approaching this in a productive manner," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "We're here because Malik expressed discomfort due to the interactions happening in your classroom, Ms. Hall. We need to address that fully." Ms. Hall sat rigidly, a stiffness in her shoulders that hadn't softened since she entered the room. Her eyes flicked between the assistant principal and Malik's father, as though she were trying to calculate a response that would hold everything together. "With all due respect," she began, "I have always maintained high expectations for my students. When something doesn't seem accurate, I ask for clarification. That's all I did here." "No," Malik's dad replied, his tone quiet but firm. "That's not all you did." She swallowed. "I was simply trying to prevent misunderstandings." "No," he repeated, more sharply this time, but never raising his voice. "You were trying to prevent the possibility of believing him." The words struck the room like a sudden shift in weather, a subtle drop in temperature, a tremor beneath the calm. Ms. Hall blinked. "That is not true." "It is," he said. "Because you didn't ask him questions to understand. You asked questions to undermine." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "You didn't say, 'Tell me more so I can better understand.' You said, 'Are you sure?' That seems unlikely. You didn't express curiosity. You expressed doubt. Direct doubt." Her face tightened, cheeks growing faintly pink. And then you repeated that doubt," he continued, "in front of the entire class." Malik kept his eyes on the table. His throat felt warm. The words his father spoke out loud were the exact words he had been too scared to say himself. The assistant principal nodded slowly, her gaze directed at Ms. Hall. "This is consistent with what Malik reported," she said. "We have to acknowledge the implications." Ms. Hall shifted uncomfortably. "I don't believe I treated him unfairly." Malik's father leaned forward slightly. "Did you question the accuracy of any other student's paragraph the way you questioned his?" She hesitated. Her silence was louder than any answer she could have given. The assistant principal took a slow breath. "Ms. Hall, I think—" But before she could finish, the door opened. The principal stepped inside. His expression was serious in a way that told Malik, without any explanation, that he already knew everything. His presence shifted the energy instantly, as though the room had been waiting for him. "Good afternoon," he said, closing the door behind him. "I've reviewed the concerns brought to my attention." He took one look at Malik. "Are you all right?" Malik nodded, though the question made something inside him tremble. The principal turned his attention to Ms. Hall. "I've read the documentation from the assistant principal," he said. "We need to address this situation with complete clarity." Ms. Hall straightened, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, I was simply doing my job as an educator. I didn't mean to create any discomfort." The principal's gaze remained unblinking. "Intent does not erase impact." Her lips thinned. "And your impact in this case," he continued, "was inappropriate." A flash of panic crossed her face. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," he said. "This was a pattern of behavior directed at a single student, a student who told the truth, a student repeatedly treated as though he was incapable of telling the truth." Silence held the room for several seconds. Then the principal spoke again. "Malik," he said gently, "you're not in trouble. You've done nothing wrong. I'm sorry you had to experience this." The warmth of his tone made Malik's throat tighten. His dad placed a hand on Malik's back. The principal continued, turning toward Ms. Hall. "We are responsible for creating a safe learning environment. What you've demonstrated over the past several days falls far below our expectations." Ms. Hall sat frozen. "I'd like to discuss next steps," the principal said, addressing the assistant principal. "This will likely require formal review." A quiet gasp escaped Ms. Hall. "I've been teaching for 20 years, she whispered. "I've never had a complaint like this." The principal nodded. "Then I'm sure you understand how important it is to uphold the standard you've set for yourself." Her breathing quickened. "This is unfair," she said. "I didn't do anything to deserve—" "You're making this about yourself," Malik's dad interjected. "It's not." Her eyes snapped to him, glistening with emotion he couldn't quite name. Fear, perhaps, or defensiveness. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, voice trembling as her composure began to fracture. "Students exaggerate all the time. They make things up. They come in with stories that don't add up. I deal with that every year. And you believed my son was lying before you even heard the full story," he said. "Because of what?" She blinked rapidly. He leaned in slightly. "Because of who?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. The principal stepped in. "Ms. Hall, let's take a moment. This conversation is becoming emotional, and we need to remain focused on the issue at hand." But emotion was already unraveling the edges of the scene. Ms. Hall pressed a hand to her forehead. "I didn't mean... I thought..." She shook her head. Malik watched her, feeling something unexpected rising in him. Not anger, not satisfaction. Something softer, something he didn't quite know how to hold. She looked lost, almost frightened, as though the walls she had built around her authority were collapsing one brick at a time. He didn't know what to do with the feeling. His dad noticed, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. The principal cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the meeting. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "We are initiating a formal review. During this process, you will be temporarily removed from classroom duties." Ms. Hall's eyes widened. "You're removing me?" "For now," he replied. "Until we examine all information, you will meet with the district office and provide your perspective. This is procedure." She shook her head slowly, eyes glistening. "I didn't mean any harm." "You caused harm," Malik's dad said softly. "Even if you didn't intend to." Her breath quivered. The room fell still. Finally, the principal stood. "Let's adjourn. We'll reconvene once the review begins." The assistant principal nodded and moved to open the door. As the adults rose, Malik remained seated for a moment longer, his legs feeling weak beneath him. His dad gently urged him up. As they exited the conference room, they stepped into a hallway where the afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting long streaks of light across the linoleum floor. Students passing by slowed, their eyes following the small procession. Ms. Hall walking stiffly beside the assistant principal, her face drained. Malik walking beside his dad, his heartbeat heavy but steady. The principal close behind them. It felt like the entire school was watching a shift happening, even if they didn't know why. Ms. Hall disappeared around a corner with the administrators. Malik stood with his dad near the office doorway. The tension inside him didn't vanish, but something inside him felt a fraction lighter, like a knot beginning to loosen, even if only slightly. His dad crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "You did great," he said gently. "You were brave. This isn't easy for anyone, especially not someone your age. I'm proud of you." Malik blinked, feeling the warmth of the words. "I didn't really do anything." "Yes, you did," his dad replied. "You told the truth, even when it was hard. Not everyone can do that." Malik looked at the floor. His dad placed a warm hand on his back. "You ready to go back to class, or do you want to take a moment?" Malik hesitated. "Maybe a moment." His dad nodded. "We'll sit for a bit." They found a bench near the office. Students walked by, giving Malik a mix of curious and sympathetic looks. Some slowed down as if they wanted to talk to him. Others hurried past, wanting to avoid getting caught up in something they didn't understand. As minutes passed, Malik felt his heartbeat settle little by little. But he also sensed that things were not finished. What happened in the conference room was only one part of something bigger. Something that had been building quietly in every classroom, every hallway whisper, every dismissive comment. And something else was already building. A new wave of tension. A new confrontation. A moment when everything held back would force its way forward. Because even though Ms. Hall was removed from the classroom, the story around Malik had already spread. Students were talking. Parents would start hearing. Teachers would discuss. The hallway felt different in the days that followed, as though some invisible current kept shifting beneath people's feet. News about what happened in the conference room spread faster than anyone could track, carried through whispered conversations and half-finished sentences. Even students who barely knew Malik found themselves watching him with a strange blend of curiosity and hesitation, unsure how close they were allowed to step into the unfolding story. He felt the change everywhere. In the cafeteria where kids paused their conversations when he walked by. In the classroom where teachers seemed to choose their words carefully around him now. In the hallways where groups of students broke apart suddenly when he approached, their eyes darting with silent questions. Some of it felt like support. Some felt like caution. Some felt like a quiet, growing tension making its way through the school's structure like a slow-moving storm. Malik tried to keep his head down, but the weight of everything lingered, even in the smallest moments. On the bus ride home that week, he sat by the window as usual, but the world outside passed in muted colors. Trees blurred together. Houses slid by like silhouettes. His thoughts kept returning to the conference room, to the look on Ms. Hall's face when the principal told her she'd be removed from classroom duties. Her expression had stayed with him, trembling, confused, breaking at the edges. He didn't know why he kept thinking about it. Maybe because part of him expected to feel relieved, but instead, he felt something softer, something more complicated. When he walked into the house that afternoon, his mom greeted him with a hug that lasted longer than usual. His dad, who had stayed after their meeting for a follow-up conversation with the administration, looked at him with quiet reassurance. "How are things feeling?" his dad asked. Malik hesitated. "Different." "Different good or different hard?" his mom asked. He thought about it. "Both." They understood without needing more explanation. They sat with him at the dining table, letting him talk as much or as little as he wanted. His dad explained the next steps, how the district would conduct a review, how the school would monitor his classroom environment closely, how teachers had been reminded to remain conscious of how they addressed students. Malik listened silently. Some parts gave him comfort. Others made him nervous. The next morning, students gathered in the cafeteria before class as usual. But as Malik took his seat at one of the tables, he caught the sound of someone calling his name. "Hey, Malik?" He turned. A girl from his English class stood shifting her weight from foot to foot. She had never spoken to him before. Not directly. Her voice was soft, unsure. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about how things went. I didn't really get what was happening before. But now I do. Or at least I think I do." He blinked, surprised. "Thanks." She nodded, relieved. "Yeah, I just wanted you to know." She walked away quickly, leaving Malik unsure how to process the gesture. More students approached him that day. Small interactions, brief acknowledgments, a boy offering him his seat on the bus, another kid sharing a pencil with him in class without being asked, a group letting him cut ahead in the lunch line when he dropped his tray. None of these moments felt dramatic on their own, but the accumulation created a gradual shift, like ripples spreading across still water. Yet the school wasn't entirely at ease. Something in the atmosphere still braced for impact. In English class, a substitute teacher filled the space Ms. Hall once commanded. The room felt unfamiliar, rearranged. Some students whispered about where Ms. Hall had gone. Others speculated about her return. Malik tried not to listen, but fragments drifted toward him anyway. "Do you think she's coming back? Maybe she's in trouble. I heard she got fired. Someone said the district stepped in." He didn't want to think about it. He didn't want to imagine her sitting alone, replaying everything over and over, wondering how things had escalated so fast. He didn't want to picture her fragile expression from the meeting. But he did. He couldn't help it. The following week, the principal called Malik into his office again. His mom and dad joined through speakerphone since they were at work. "Malik," the principal began, "we wanted to update you. The district has begun formal review proceedings regarding your teacher. This process includes interviews, classroom evaluations, and assessments of student equity. It may take some time, but they're taking the situation seriously." Malik nodded, feeling that same tangled mix of relief and heaviness. "Additionally," the principal continued, "we want to ensure you feel supported going forward. If you experience anything concerning, or if you simply need someone to talk to, please come to us." His voice was warm but sincere. When Malik left the office, he felt steadier, though not entirely settled. Something inside him knew the story wasn't finished. Not for him, not for Ms. Hall, not for the school. The next day, he felt the shift more clearly. As he walked down the hallway between classes, he noticed two teachers standing near the doorway, whispering in low voices. Their eyes briefly flicked toward him before returning to whatever conversation they were having. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't judgmental. It was something else, Mike. Something like reflection. Later that afternoon, the guidance counselor called him in. She offered him a seat and spoke with genuine warmth. "I know things have been difficult lately," she said. "I want you to know that you handled yourself incredibly well. What you did took courage." Malik's shoulders tensed. "I didn't do anything." She smiled softly. "You stood up for the truth. That matters more than you know." He looked down, feeling the weight of her words sink slowly into him. "Do you have any questions about everything happening?" she asked. He hesitated. "Is she okay?" The counselor blinked. She hadn't expected that. "Ms. Hall?" He nodded. The counselor took a quiet breath. "She's going through a process. I can't share details, but she's meeting with the district. She'll also be completing additional training. It's not easy on her either." Malik's chest tightened. "I didn't want her to get fired." The counselor nodded. "I know, but what happened needed to be addressed, and she has the chance to learn from it." He nodded, though his heart still felt heavy. That night, he lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Everything that had happened replayed over and over. The moment she doubted him, the tension in the classroom, the conference room, her face trembling with emotion. He didn't want her to feel broken. He didn't want her to feel hopeless. He only wanted things to be fair. The next morning, as he stepped off the bus, he saw the principal standing near the entrance, speaking with a few staff members. When he noticed Malik, he smiled and gave him a reassuring nod. Throughout the day, something continued to shift. Students acted differently around him, not avoiding him, not crowding him, but treating him with a new sense of quiet respect. Even teachers spoke to him with a tone that felt more thoughtful. During lunch, his friend Jordan slid into the seat across from him. "You all right?" Jordan asked between bites of his sandwich. Malik shrugged. "Yeah, I think so." Jordan leaned forward. "Hey, I know things got rough, but you didn't do anything wrong. Everyone knows that now." Malik stared at his lunch tray. "I didn't want all this attention." "I get that," Jordan said. "But sometimes you don't get to decide when you stand out. Sometimes it just happens." Malik nodded, a small weight lifting. That same afternoon, something unexpected happened. As Malik headed to his last class of the day, a staff member approached him. "Malik?" The principal would like to see you again." His pulse quickened. He followed the staff member to the office, where the principal stood with an expression that carried both softness and formality. "I have something to tell you," the principal said. "Ms. Hall requested to speak with you, privately." Malik's breath stalled. "She understands this is your choice," the principal added. "You don't have to meet with her, but she asked if you would." Malik's mind spun. He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know what she would say. But something inside him nudged him gently forward. "I'll talk to her," he whispered. The principal nodded. "I'll bring her in." Malik sat down at a small round table in the same conference room from before. His hands rested in his lap, his fingers curling against each other. The room felt bigger now, quieter, its stillness wrapped around him like a thin layer of fog. After a moment, the door opened. Ms. Hall stepped inside. She looked different, not in appearance but in presence. The authority she usually carried had softened. Her posture held a humility he'd never seen in her before. She took the seat across from him, her hands clasped together. The principal stood back, giving them space. "Malik," she began, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." He nodded faintly. She took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology." His chest tightened. "I treated you unfairly," she continued. "I doubted you when I shouldn't have. I made assumptions I had no right to make, and I spoke to you in ways that caused hurt. That was wrong." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble." A small tremble moved across her expression. "You didn't get me in trouble. My actions did." She paused, gathering herself. "I want you to know," she said, "that I've been meeting with the district and reviewing my practices. I'm learning things about myself, things I should have learned a long time ago, and I'm committed to changing them." Malik nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "I truly am." He didn't know what to feel. Part of him still hurt. Part of him felt relief. Part of him felt a tenderness he didn't expect toward someone who had caused him so much pain. "It's okay," he finally said, but not because he wanted to erase anything, because he meant he forgave her effort. She nodded, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. "I hope someday," she said, "you'll feel comfortable having me as a teacher again. But if you don't, I understand." He thought about her words for a long moment. "Maybe one day," he said quietly. The principal stepped forward. "Thank you both," he said. "This conversation took a great deal of courage." Ms. Hall stood slowly and left the room with the principal, her steps small and steady. Malik stayed seated for a moment, breathing in the quiet. His chest felt lighter, but also heavier. The conflict had begun to settle, but the weight of everything still lingered, shifting into something gentler, yet still complex. When he returned to class, students glanced at him with wide eyes. Some whispered, wanting to know what had happened. Malik shook his head, offering them a small shrug. "It's okay," was all he said. Over the next few days, the school began to return to a new kind of normal. Not the same as before, but something calmer. Malik found himself focusing more in class. His steps down the hallway grew less tense. He even laughed during lunch one day, surprising himself. But even as things quieted around him, one piece of the story still waited, just beneath the surface. his dad. They had spoken briefly each night, but Malik sensed that his dad was waiting for something, waiting for a moment when things had settled enough for him to share something more. And that moment arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Malik walked inside the house to find his dad sitting at the table with a stack of folders beside him. His expression held the same calm strength as always, but there was something thoughtful in his eyes. "Hey, champ," his dad said. "Come sit down for a minute." Malik sat carefully. His dad closed the folder he'd been reading. "Now that things at school are settling, I want to talk to you about something important." Malik felt his heart begin to quicken. His dad placed a hand on the folder. "I think it's time you knew a little more about what I actually do at the Pentagon." Malik's breath caught. "Not everything," his dad clarified with a small smile. "Just enough so you understand why some things happened the way they did." Malik nodded slowly, his pulse growing louder in his ears. His dad exhaled, preparing to explain. And in that quiet moment between inhale and exhale, between the settling of one conflict and the beginning of another understanding, the story shifted again, preparing to move toward its final chapter. Not ending. Just turning. Malik had never seen his father look quite this thoughtful, sitting at the dining table with the afternoon light falling across his shoulders. The house felt unusually still, as though it understood something important was about to be shared. Malik slid into the chair beside him and waited, palms pressed lightly against the wood. His father rested a hand on the folder before him and exhaled slowly. "You're getting older," he said gently. "Old enough to handle certain truths with respect. And I think the past few weeks have shown me how strong you really are." Malik felt warmth rise in his chest, unsure whether it was pride or nervousness. His father continued, "So I want to tell you a little more about what I do, not everything. I can't do that. But enough so that you understand why I react the way I do, why I show up the way I show up." Malik nodded slowly. "Okay." His dad opened the folder, revealing documents with most of the text blacked out, important-looking stamps across the headers. He didn't hand any of them to Malik, just kept them visible long enough to show they weren't normal papers. "I'm involved in operations that don't get talked about," he said quietly. "Things that matter more than people realize. It's not glamorous. It's not what movies make it look like. It's long hours, careful decisions, and a lot of responsibility." Malik watched him closely, absorbing every word. His father closed the folder again and slid it aside. "The reason I tell you this is because what happened at school, it's part of a bigger story. People carry assumptions everywhere they go, even adults, even teachers. And sometimes those assumptions get heavy enough to hurt someone else." Malik lowered his gaze. "It hurt." His dad placed a hand on his back. "I know it did, and I wish I could have shielded you from all of it. But I'm proud of how you handled yourself." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the last few weeks settling gently instead of painfully. "In the future," his dad continued, "you might face moments like this again. People might underestimate you or doubt you, sometimes because of your age, sometimes because of your background, sometimes because they can't imagine your story being bigger than the box they put you in." Malik swallowed hard, listening closely. "But you know who you are," his father said, "and you know the truth. That's something no one can take away. Not ever." Malik breathed in deeply, letting his father's words settle. His mom joined them a few minutes later, sensing the seriousness but offering a warm smile. She kissed Malik's forehead and placed dinner plates on the counter, the clatter grounding the moment back into ordinary life. As they ate together, Malik felt something shift, not a dramatic turn, but a quiet settling. Like his story, which had been shaken loose, was beginning to find its place again. The next day at school, the world felt different. Not perfectly calm, not magically fixed, but different in a way that promised steadier footing. Students greeted him more easily now, not with pity or nervous curiosity, but with simple acknowledgement. Nods, smiles, brief waves. Jordan patted Malik on the shoulder as they walked toward the cafeteria. "You good?" he asked. Malik nodded. "Yeah, I think so." In English class, the substitute teacher handed out an assignment on personal narratives. Malik stared at the blank page for a moment before beginning to write. This time his words came naturally, flowing like something finally released. He didn't write about the conflict. He didn't write about the meeting or the tension or the apology. Instead, he wrote about the feeling of being believed, about strength found in places he didn't expect, about a father who walked into a classroom not to intimidate anyone, but to protect his son's truth. As he wrote, he felt steady. Later in the hallway, the principal approached him. "Malik," he said with a gentle nod, "I wanted to thank you for handling everything with maturity, far beyond your years. You've helped us see things we needed to see." Malik felt a modest warmth rise in his chest. "Thank you. We'll continue supporting you," the principal added. "If you ever need anything, my door is open." Malik nodded again, grateful. A few days later, during dismissal, someone called his name. He turned. Ms. Hall stood near the entrance, dressed in civilian clothes instead of her usual work attire. She held her bag in one hand and a small envelope in the other. Malik froze, uncertain. She approached with slow, careful steps. "I won't keep you long," she said quietly. "I just wanted to give you something." She held out the envelope. Malik hesitated before taking it. Her eyes were softer now, tired but sincere. "It's a letter," she said. "I wanted to put my apology in writing, not because anyone told me to, but because I wanted you to have something you can hold on to if you ever doubt yourself. You deserve that." Malik stared at the envelope, then up at her. "Thank you," he said. She offered a small nod, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of yourself, Malik." Then she turned and walked away. Malik watched her leave, feeling a swirl of emotions, sadness, understanding, closure, not fighting each other but settling into a quiet harmony. At home, he opened the letter. The handwriting was neat, more deliberate than usual. "Malik, I am writing this to say again that I am sorry for the harm my words caused. I allowed prejudice and assumption to override understanding and respect. You told the truth, and I failed to honor that. I have begun training and reflection to ensure I never treat another student the way I treated you. You taught me something important. I hope you never lose the courage you showed. You are bright, capable, and deserving of respect. Thank you for allowing me the chance to apologize. Ms. Hall." Malik folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside his bed. That night, he sat with his parents at the dinner table as they talked about ordinary things, school projects, grocery lists, family gatherings. But beneath the everyday conversation, Malik felt something else settle in his chest. A quiet strength. Not the kind found in loud moments or dramatic confrontations, but the kind that grows inside someone who has walked through something difficult and emerged a little taller. The next week arrived with warm weather. The sky stretched wide and blue, carrying the scent of spring. Malik walked to the bus stop with lighter steps, backpack bouncing gently against his shoulders. As he boarded the bus, he noticed something he hadn't seen in a while. A sense of calm inside himself. Not because everything was perfect, not because nothing would ever go wrong again, but because he knew something important. He was strong enough to stand inside the truth, even when others tried to shrink it. At school, he took his seat in the classroom, sunlight spilling across his desk. The substitute smiled at him before beginning the lesson. As Malik opened his notebook, he felt a small, brave spark inside him. The spark of someone who understood his own worth. A spark that no doubt, no assumption, no disbelief could extinguish. And as the day unfolded, he moved through the halls with quiet confidence, knowing he'd come through something hard and found something steady waiting inside himself. The story that had shaken him had also shaped him, and it was his story now, held firmly, truthfully, and entirely in his hands. By the time he stepped off the bus that afternoon and walked toward his home, sunlight warming his skin, he found himself smiling. Not because everything was perfect, but because he finally felt whole again. And that was enough.